And we are live with our very special and most important guest, Jeff Nyquist. He's been on the show before. We've talked about some geopolitical stuff. Jeff is a prolific author and an expert in foreign wars and foreign geopolitics, especially Russia and I believe communism in general. Am I getting all that right, Jeff? And welcome to the show.
Yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah. Yeah, because communism, we're going to talk about materialism, I guess, versus spirituality. The idea that we are spiritual beings and there's a spiritual reality, and communism is dialectical materialism. They deny that.
Yeah.
And positivism does that, and Freudianism really has that kind of notion. Materialism has been the in thing for academics, for scientists, for a lot of people. Of course, it isn't completely destroyed the idea of spirituality. People that has always been there, but it's really, people have cast doubt on it. It's like the brain.
It's close. Let's be honest. The Illuminati and Hollywood and all that nonsense is driving society, and more people are gravitating towards the Western ways. And so this materialistic way is literally taking over. And if you look at the statistics, less and less people are members of religions, and the whole idea of God is reducing. I think maybe only we're about 50% of the people believe in a higher power, maybe 60%, but it's definitely been reducing.
Well, and the thing is that, everybody's, if people have a spiritual life, if they have an encounter with God, or they have had some experience with the occult, and a lot of people they start, the people who are searching often do these things, have these experiences. And that we have a long history of very brilliant people who have been talking about it, writing about it for centuries. And we're in this very bizarre place where we have a poverty of reflection about it. And we're in a crisis, because I think, and the main reason we're in a crisis is because we have denied the spirit. We've said that the spirit is an epiphenomenal of chemical reactions in the brain. It's an epiphenomena. And if you go to the great philosophers, you go to Plato or Aristotle, Bishop Berkeley at the beginning of his philosophy, or Schopenhauer, maybe, who was an atheist who believed in spiritual things, you realize that, wait a minute, maybe physical reality is epiphenomenal, and the brain is not our spirit is not in our brain. Our brain is just like a radio receiver that picks up something from another dimension, which is our spirit that dwells with, in that spiritual realm, that when we die, we go home.
Now, Jeff, could you explain for the listeners epiphenomenal before we continue?
Epiphenomenal. Epiphenomenal means that it's not it's not the primary thing, right? It's a tertiary. It's way down the road. It's not, so if I say spirit is epiphenomenal, it means it's produced by something more primary, like matter, like my brain. So the idea that my consciousness is actually the byproduct of the chemical reactions in my brain is to say that consciousness is epiphenomenal. What's primary is this biological entity, which is just like a robot, and I just think I'm conscious, right? It's not an ultimate reality if it's epiphenomenal, right? It's a consequence of something else, right? And so the ancients believed, the ancient philosophers, different look, you go to the ancient Hebrews, you go to the ancient Egyptians, you go to the ancient the Hermeticists, the Christian church fathers. Reality was created out of God's mind, the mind of God, the ultimate intelligence, right? And the ultimate being in the universe created the material universe. And you have Aristotle calling him the unmoved mover. And we have all these stories in our religious history, in our holy books, about trying to describe God, who is described as a person in the Old and New Testament, as a father, right, as a heavenly father by the Christian church fathers. So all of these, but of course, God is so much higher than us that we cannot. We're mortal beings. Our consciousness is limited. So how does a lower intelligence understand a higher intelligence? Right? This is a sort of like almost a paradox, because we can't. It's an impertinence almost. And this is the problem we have. But we have these stories. These you could say they're metalogical stories, like the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, the first man and first woman. And the story is extremely profound. And the events portrayed in the Bible, we don't, the ancient stories about the flood and all the things that happened there, the catastrophism and the role of God in that, there's a lot of deep stuff in there. And there's maybe lost wisdom referred to.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in, and we'll get to that. Let's get to that later. And there is, if we get to the ancient Torah, and not the Torah itself, there's an older book that is written in Hebrew that is the precursor to the Torah before it was shifted. And if you go into there, and we should bring that up later, Yahweh itself, which would be God and later to become Jesus, Yahweh, the description, and this is literal from the greatest experts around the world, Yahweh translates to dragon because it's a description of not fire-breathing nostrils and then a snake that flies. So it's literally Yahweh is a dragon. And so when you just mentioned catastrophism as it relates to God and some of the work I've done, if there is a solar blast every 7,000 years, or every 12,000 or 26,000 years, then these cultures, that would be the myth. Because if a huge plasma stream is hitting Earth, and it literally could shoot out the pieces of the surface of the sun, we're hitting the planet. And there's evidence of that in the Four Corners region and other areas of vitrification of megaliths and things like that. If there was a big solar outburst, well, most of the cultures would have described that would be where the dragon myth comes from. And in some of these ancient writings, they're talking about God as Yahweh, as dragon, and that might be where some of the mythology comes from.
Where did you run across the dragon reference to it?
Well, I've been recently doing research into the Torah, and then I happened upon these experts in the Torah, and they were breaking down the word Yahweh and its origins. So they just went to the origins of the word.
Do you think that's credible, or is it, it's interesting.
Oh, absolutely credible, because what they show is that how it's changed from 1200 AD through the time where it eventually gets replaced as God. But it's originally a dragon. In the original writings in the Torah, the first writings, Yahweh is a dragon.
That's very strange. What is this? What are these writings?
Oh, I wish I could pull it up here. If you give me a second, I will be able to find it.
Well, of course,
did I lose you?
No, I'm right here.
Okay, so can we continue about the spirituality piece?
Yeah, well, of course, the thing is that you see, the problem with, you're taking some religious symbols and you're attaching a physical interpretation. You're making it about an astronomical or a solar event. And the thing is that when you go to, and maybe some of that kind of thing is in there, but when you go to a lot of it, like when you go to a lot of it, an idea of ideas having to do, cosmological ideas having to do with the nature of the soul itself and man's destiny in the world, in a spiritual level, are probably more significant for us. And the stories or narratives that we tell, how we read them, kind of determines who we're going to be in a way. And that's really something to think about, because if we adopt the wrong narratives, the wrong interpretation of things, we can end up destroying ourselves and linking up with the wrong stuff. I mean,
Yeah. So
right. And
so
so
here
it's, yeah.
herein lies the issue. If these texts, the biblical texts, the grand myths, if they're actually describing some calamity or catastrophism that has reset our society as a warning, and they wrote it down in these books, and then people come along and make religions out of them, then it's going to completely destroy the idea of spirituality. Because I remember, and I deal with a lot of people that are dealing with spiritual issues. I was a person that didn't believe in God for decades.
Wow.
And it was because of my own self-destructive nature. I was a materialist. I hated government. I hated authority. I hated myself. And
Really? That's an interesting insight.
yeah, and I separated myself from all the spiritual things. And
Hmm.
so, when things get bad enough, you always have the foxhole prayers, right? You're like,
Right.
God help me.
Yeah.
When your buddies are blown up, God help me. And when you do all the bad things and the police are chasing you, God help me. When you get your DUI and you're a lawyer or you're elected official, you're in that jail cell, you're like, God help me. So these are those foxhole prayers that I learned are not in vain, because there is a higher power in this world. If you just take some time to delve into the spiritual realms, it doesn't go by any religion, as far as I'm concerned, from what I've heard from other people and from my own experience. And it's
Hmm.
a personal thing. It's a
Hmm.
personal relationship that you can create by being available to the universe. And it's that simple. And I think you and I spoke a week ago, and I shared with you an experience where
Yes.
a mentor of mine, I told him everything I just said here. Like, I didn't believe in God. I have a big hole in my chest. I feel like a non-human. I feel useless and empty. And he said, well, just pray. And I was like, pray? Like, I was so against praying because, like, my grandma and the hateful God, that I'm always going to hell. And a lot of people grew up like that. You're going to hell. And that's not just in my religion, but you're going to hell if you do that. Your face will stick like that. You'll go to hell. If you keep doing that, you're going to hell. And so you get raised in this fear of God, of like this
Hmm.
horrible thing called God. And that's not my God. And that's certainly the spiritual awakening I've had is completely different than the religious, hateful God,
Hmm.
the judgmental God. This is an
Right.
all loving feeling. And I've also, I think, related to you that in some high dose plant medicine cases, when I'm going in looking for answers, I also tap into that. The only answer is there's no purpose except to love. So this loving God exists. It doesn't have a particular name. Anyone can access it. I'm sure you have, because you're a spiritual person. But people are being blocked from this, from the mainstream narratives, the mainstream ideas, and materialism, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And it's a detriment to society. And we can see what's happening with society. I mean, right before our very
Yeah, we
eyes.
can. There's a fascinating there's an interesting show, by the way, on I think it's on CBS. It's called Evil, or it's on Paramount Plus, and it's about a Catholic priest and a nun who are wrestling with demons. It's quite fascinating because it 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 creates this world where people are interacting with good and evil and having really fundamental choices, and it's rather interesting. But um, like your experience, you called on this. Me, I was raised in a Christian home, and I understood, when you study the scriptures, when you study the Bible, you realize that there's deep wisdom in things like the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done. And you realize that my will, what is my will? And you were talking about your own self-destructiveness. And there is this self-destructive thing when we're not connected to this God of the universe, this creator God, because this you look at the universe, you look at how beautiful the creation is. You look at how amazing a human being is. You're looking at the most amazing. I mean, look at proof for God. Look at your hand. It's like, how does this, the eye, that you could see, and the brain, all the wonders of nature, and you're thinking, wait a minute, this is not an accident, right? This didn't get here by accident. And so you have in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you have these profound stories and prayers and insights and this narrative. And where people go wrong is some people, they will take something in there the wrong way. They'll not understand it correctly. They'll understand it literally when it should be understood spiritually. They won't quite understand the deeper meaning, because the deeper meaning is really deep. And like for me, what was really big was I was struggling with my first book, which was, you were just asking me about it before the show, The Origins of the Fourth World War. And I had a copy sitting here just a minute ago. Here it is. This is my first book. And I started writing it in 87 because I was a political scientist. I was in graduate school and I had an epiphany. I was reading the defector literature, the people from the former Soviet Union. And I found that 3 defectors talked about, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, before Gorbachev, they talked about a plan to fake the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, to fake it. It was Jan Shana, it was Anatoly Golitsyn, and Zaslav Bittman. And I found out there's, other evidence. And I was dumbfounded, because I thought, nobody read this literature. And I realized that my colleagues, people that already were getting their PhDs and were working for Rand Corporation or the State Department or the Pentagon or the CIA, they were educated wrong. And so I'm writing this book, and I'm like, it's way beyond me. It's just, I was 29 years old. Well, when I started writing it, I was 29 years old, and it was really tough. And I had 1,000 pages, and it was like, I'm going through this. This is drivel. This is horrible. And I kind of see the arrogance of my own intellect reflected back on me. And I think, so I said a prayer, and I said, God, thy will be done. Help me to say this the right way, because this is important. People have to understand this. I don't want my ego or my desire to be important to get in the way of this. And it all changed. Suddenly it came together. Everything flowed. Everything. It was like,
how long did it take?
Well, with the research and everything, about 4 to 5 years to.
No, for the shift to occur. And I want people to be very clear on this, because your experience is the same as mine. It took about 7 days.
Yeah.
And the nature of prayer, the way you do it is very specific. And I was taught by many mentors, experts, that there can be no ego. You can't say, I want to be a millionaire, or I need this to be perfect. You say, look, if I'm struggling, I need answers. I have no idea what the answers are. Your will, not mine. Please show me.
That's it. It's like the Lord's Prayer. It's just like the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, and so a lot of these things, and I came to realize, I was, and the other thing, the reason that I consider myself a Christian is sin, which is a word for error. And this is, you talked about hell earlier, and I have a different understanding of that. In the middle of my life, I did something that I never thought I would do, that I consider wrong. And I could not believe I did it. And I didn't do it I don't know why I did it. And it was not just guilt. It was profound confrontation with it was profoundly humiliating. And I realized that the weakness of being a human being, that you have to be on guard against yourself at all times. And that is what God will help you with too. Because what hell really is it's separation from God. And it's like Dante's Inferno. You hell, if you read Dante's Inferno, there's a lot of really comfortable places in hell. Have you ever read it?
Oh, absolutely. And my entire life is Dante's Inferno. So I'd love to relate it.
There's it's very interesting, though. A lot of the rungs of hell are really very pleasant. It's like the pagan philosophers part, they're actually in a pretty good place. But the idea is it's that that relation, like you talked about, that relationship with God is the thing that blesses you, that it gives you the grace and allows you to be the best you can be, as long as you are not an arrogant, narcissistic, greedy bastard, right?
Well, let's explain that, because for me, what that means is once I listened to my sponsor and I told him about my God problem, and he told me to pray. It took about, I told you, 7 or 8 days. And I just had a big question. And he just said, just ask the question. It's not coming from ego, and say, it's your will. Please guide me. And I did that. I felt so stupid because I was so against, like, my grandmother made me kneel every night and do the Hail Marys and all that in a Roman Catholic family. And it made me feel weird. I'm like, what is this? It feels like, like some kind of weird rules to get into heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole notion was erased. And that when I woke up on that 7th or 8th day in the morning, and I just went outside to have a gratitude moment where I thought of 10 things that I'm grateful for.
Gratitude
I was
is
like,
important.
all of a sudden, after I said a bunch of things I was grateful for, the answer to my question that I had no answer to flowed into me. And it filled me with a great joy. And the way we explain it is serenity. I had this serenity that I could do anything I wanted ever in the rest of my life, and nothing matters. That was the moment I knew my prayer was answered. So it was very profound.
Well, the serenity, when I was writing this, I was in a dark place, because this is a dark book, and I was broke. I was basically kicked out of my profession. I had no viable future at all, and I felt very happy. And the serenity that you describe, yeah, I got that.
Isn't that funny? Because when I was feeling that serenity, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had the lowest paying job. I was living in a crack house in the middle of the dirtiest shithole city in the world, surrounded by drugs and alcohol. And I was sober. I was alive. And like the birds were chirping and the trees were beautiful for the first time ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. You realize that all the stuff you thought was important is not important. It isn't. And this is the thing that is when you look, it's very interesting about the world and the way it works. And you look at the New Testament, look at the symbolism. Christ says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Truth. That's very important. Because what do they do to the truth? If Christ is the truth, they crucify him. Well, that's what we do to the truth. That's what the world does to the truth all the time. It crucifies the truth. But what does the truth do? It comes back. It doesn't, you can't kill it, right? You can't kill it. It comes back. No. And, it pours out its grace on the world. And it tells you that you should not care what the world thinks, because the world is, and by the way, if you're going to get up and stand for something that's true, you're going to get crucified.
Yeah.
And then when it's pick up your cross, right? When it's pick up your cross, that's what you are doing. And it's the serenity. You get these graces for doing it. And people say, what are you doing? You're ruining yourself. Why would you do this? Right? You're ruining yourself, What are you trying to be, a martyr? But you know what is very funny? It's like, and you talk about God and you talk about grace, somehow you're taken care of. Impossible things happen. It's like, wait a minute, I should have been, living out of a dumpster. I should have been dead. Why am I still alive? How did I get through that? You get carried through it.
Yeah, exactly. And I can attest to that. I mean, I was in the lowest place of my life, living in the worst place. And and the moment that I had that spiritual experience where God answered me, or whatever you want to call it, people say it's God. For me, it's a higher power that is the universe. And it doesn't have to be God. It was just named God by religions and other people. You may be comfortable using God, but a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. And I want everyone to have this spiritual experience because everyone can achieve it. You just have to drop your defenses and drop your ego and ask honestly for the will of the universe to answer you, and it comes to you. Now, a big part of my healing process to tap into this spiritual nature was to get rid of all the skeletons in my closet. And you had brought up something horrible that you did, and the only way that I can see that you were able to achieve this high spirituality is that you dealt with it and you told someone else, or you told a clergyman or someone you confided in, and they said that it's fine. It's the past, and today is today. Everything moves forward. We're only alive now. And I think a lot of people hold on to the past. You don't want to shut the door on the past, especially if you did terrible things. I did terrible things for decades. I was a terrible, horrible person, but I don't have to be that person anymore. And that's that is the serenity that I now have, that I don't have to ever do those things. And I have a purpose-driven life. So once I had this spiritual connection, just like you said, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It makes you feel wonderful. It helps other people. You tend to be a benefit to the world in general.
Yeah. Well, there's something about God. He doesn't want us to be worldly in the, wanting to aggrandize our egos, wanting to get rich, wanting to dominate other people. This truth thing, standing for what's true, being good, being kind, like you say, love. These are all the things that is really wanted, that you can build on. And of course, this is very difficult because look at the world. What is the matter with you? Why didn't you trample him down? Why didn't you climb that ladder? Why didn't you make that big money? Oh, you're a loser, right? This is what they're going to put on you, and so many people have that put on them, and it's like, and I hear there's a lot of people, they know better, but yet they get drawn into that materialist psych. It's like, you are, think about what you are. You are a man, you're a human being. You have a limited lifespan. Why are you here? You are not here to self-aggrandize. I'm going in a box and they're going to bury me, or they're going to cremate me or something. They're going to do something to me. And it's like, I got to relate this to you because I went to school with Marxists in graduate school. There are a lot of Marxists there in political science back in 87, 88. And we had this class, Introduction to Political Analysis was the class. And it was we team taught it. It was a good class for undergraduates. It was a really good class. The guy did a great job. But we had just horrific tests and papers to grade. And we pooled together. All four of us, we got in there, we made the stacks. We did it in one night, and then we went out for pizza and beer. But it was after the beers started going, and I limited mine because I was the designated driver. We took it to this lady's house that was one of us. And one of these guys said to me, he goes, "This is the most incredible insight that I got into people who are materialists." He was a communist. He was a Colombian, a Marxist from a Colombian Marxist family. And he said, I was walking in Laguna Beach down the boardwalk. It was a beautiful night. And then I thought of all the starving people in the world and how terrible it was. And then I thought, nobody's going to remember me in 100 years. Think of the juxtaposition there, right? And so then the world was all dark. It was all bad. And I was dumbfounded because the first thought that entered my mind, what do I care about what people remember me in 100 years? I won't remember me in 100 years. I don't care. And it's like, but he didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in this grace, right?
You just froze up for a hot minute.
Oh, I did. Okay. Did you hear it? Did it come across?
Oh yeah, the Colombian guy and his
Right.
his revelation was antithetical to ours, and
Right.
his revelation was, who cares if I'm a scumbag and I accumulate shit and I make people poor?
And there's a sequel, and of course he was living in despair. He had real despair that he was living in, and so I gave him a ride home to his apartment, and I remember he was pretty drunk, and he knew I wasn't a communist, and he was half the time he was really angry at me, and because I was white, maybe, and an American, and he would say, I hate Americans, and you're all awful, and I hate white people, and whatever. He was I think he was mostly Colombian Indian in background, and but he came from must have come from a pretty prosperous family anyway. He didn't want to get out of the car. He was drunk, and he said, I know what you think. You think that if you're good, you're going to be happy, but if people are evil, they're going to be sad. And I know Colombian drug dealers, and I know criminals, and they murder people, and they do horrible things, and they're happy. So you're wrong. But, I never said this to him. I'm sure that there's murderers that are living it up somewhere and feel happy, right? But he was that stuck in his craw. I'd never said that. But that bothered him, and he gave me a lecture for about a half an hour. He wouldn't get out of my car. He was so drunk. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't know. So based on all our discussions on spirituality, and then we've late night, we've delved into demonic possession and things like that. This is, and earlier before we started the podcast, we were talking about how humans are actually very unique biological entities. Now, ones on the planet. So I don't want to sell out other hominids. I don't want to sell out other mammals like dogs and cats and pets. I think they all have a soul, just a different type of soul than a human. But what we were saying is that, and what I think I've concluded for over a decade of research into this topic is that, is that there is other entities, satanic, and these come up in the Bible, demonic entities that can affect humans. And so the whole materialism thing and a lot of that nature comes from subtle demonic possession. I'm not talking full-blown like exorcist stuff, but it could get to that. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you agree with me?
Well, I have encountered two people that I believe were demon possessed. And I'll tell you a little story. I owned a security company back in the day. I've done security contracting. I worked in psychiatric hospitals. I ran security staff for hospitals. And I did that years ago, and also government contracts. Anyway, I'll tell you this story. There was a schizophrenic man. I believed he was dangerous and violent, and I was concerned with him. I was watching him, and at one point he became fixated on me because I saw him one day walking out in town in the rain, freezing rain, and he was in a short sleeve shirt and soaked to the bone. And I told him, I said, call him by name, and I said, you need to go home and get warm. And then he oh. And then he did that. And from that point on, he would go to where I had my office, and he would stuff things under the door, letters from his mom, all kinds of things, and music that he wrote. And I was like, that's very odd. And the night janitor would put them on my desk so that I would see them. And one morning, it was early in the morning, and I had this stuff. It was like a bunch of cartoons that he'd written. and it looked like TV shows. He had TV characters. And I looked at it, and one of the managers came by and said, "Oh, you got that stuff again." And she looked at it, and she said, "What does it mean?" And I said, "I think it means he watches too much TV." And she goes, "Yeah, he probably watches too much TV." And so I put it in the file, and the building was completely closed. It was early AM. Nobody was around. So the guy comes in about 10 minutes after opening, and he's really angry and he wants to talk to me. So I get called up to the front. I go up there and I say, "What can I do for you?" And he says, "I want to tell you one thing and one thing only. I don't watch too much TV." And then he turned around and he left. He stormed out. And it took me a moment to think, wait a minute.
Wow.
He couldn't have overheard that, right? And he's as mad as a hatter. And it was, and so how could I explain it? He had telepathy, right? And he attacked me physically, and ended up, I spoke at his trial. He went to jail. He got some treatment. He got arrested after he attacked me, and technically I made the arrest. But
What did he do?
he charged me for no reason.
Yeah.
And we wrestled on the ground, and then some other folks came, and he had the strength of like 5 people. It was incredible.
Yeah.
I started working out harder after that. But he really hit me hard.
Well, you're
And,
huge now, so that's cool.
No, I used to be pretty buff, but anyway,
I've seen your YouTube picture. It's pretty hot.
YouTube. Okay. Well, whatever picture that is. But anyway, I just, I was amazed at this. And of course a bunch of people came to help me. And when he saw that there were other people there, he ran off. He was about to hit another guy with a brick or a rock that he picked up. But anyway, the other demon possession story was a lady that kept house for me.
Oh, this is brilliant.
It's unbelievable. She was kind of odd. She would sit, she'd take her breaks and she'd sit in the kitchen table and she would lean over and she would weep. And like tears would come out, but she wasn't sobbing. She was just weeping. I would go, "Are you all right? Is there anything I can do?" "No, I just do this. And, I've been diagnosed as borderline personality, and I have this problem." I said, "Oh, okay. I'm sorry," and, but then a weird thing, she seemed to develop a fixation on me. And then I noticed she was in my dreams. And these were really erotic, crazy dreams, very real. And I thought, what the heck is this? And then she would come, in, and I would see her and she would say, "Did you have the dream?" And I would say, "Was that you?" And she would smile. And I was like, whoa. And then she would give me all kinds of indications that she was reading my thoughts. She would tell me what I just thought or what I was doing. Or it was like, no, that's impossible. You can't know that. So then I finally, one day, I broke down and I put borderline personality disorder and demon possession or whatever. And I got a huge number of hits. And I read all these testimonials by psychiatrists or psychologists that say, yeah, I think some of this is supernatural. There's some kind of demonological phenomenon. This is not normal. They talk about telepathy. They talk about, these weird things that happen. And I thought, when I read all this, I thought, well, demon, if you're reading my mind, because they were saying, the demon, she doesn't read my mind, the demon does, and then tells her. So it said, well, demon, if you're reading my mind, you're going to tell me about yourself, just a flippant thought. And then I just forgot about it and I went about my regular day. And then later she came by, her usual time. She comes in and she says, "I have to tell you something. I think I'm possessed by a demon." And I was like, "What?" It's telling me about itself. And it was like, well, well, how did you get it? She was like a teenager at her uncle's or her grandfather's house, and she saw a black snake-like thing out of the corner of her eye, and she liked it because it gave her power, but it made her sad. Thus the weeping. She would be sad, but it gave her power, she said, and she didn't want to give it up because it gave her power. And
Jess, you're creeping me out. You know that.
Yeah, I know. And it was like she had a choice. She had this consciousnse about it. And I had read Malachi Martin, Hostage to the Devil, and it was like right out of his book. And I had but this is a side story. I had a friend that she was sort of jealous of. A guy that I was pretty close to, that I'd been business partners with, and he was starting a new business with someone else in town. And she really hated him. And he was driving in town, and he broadsides he's never had a car accident in his life. He broadsides this older woman, and he was just shocked. It's like, how did I not see that? And the accident happened there, and his new business partner rushes out. She goes to see if the lady's okay, and his cell phone rings, and it's this young woman, the demon possessed one. And she says, this is all she says to him: "How does it feel?" And then she hung up.
Wow,
Is that crazy?
It's beyond. That's crazy.
Yeah. So I have to say, these experiences, I can't explain it to myself except that it's real.
Well, I'll tell you what, when we were 16, I used to hang out with this kid named Mike Kelly, and he lived in this old farmhouse from the 1800s. And we used to have sleepovers on the weekend and do crazy stuff. We were, the outcast kids, light off fireworks, steal beer, bonfires or whatever. But we got into these seances, and he had some books, and his older sister helped us. And we got like a lot of people involved, almost 10, 12 people. And we were levitating people. We would do this. It got that once we started to like conjure spirits and do stuff, we got deeper and deeper into it. And this went on for like 10 weeks. And we were actually levitating people off the ground with just our single fingers with like a group of 10 people. And then weird stuff started to happen. And it was so creepy. I ran away from the scene, and I never returned ever. That's how creepy it was.
It is
ever in my life. Like I never went back anywhere near there. Within blocks of there, I stayed away. That's how.
See, that was what I related to you in an earlier thing. I had the experiences I used self-hypnosis because I was having trouble sleeping when I was doing math. Then I had these experiences. That was 40 years ago. Is that more than 40 years ago now? Around 40 years ago. And no, more than 40 years ago. I was in my early 20s, and I left that behind. I felt that I had protection. I think that I think that I had a certain protection, and because I understood from my spiritual training as growing up a Christian, I really, in a way, I took the Bible to heart. Is that you don't want power. You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to seek the wrong things. It is truly thy will be done. And you have to seek God. You have to seek truth. But what I did is I had to turn my back on those experiences, not like you running away from the seance. I had to say, I don't know what this is. I don't understand it. And it was sort of from that moment that maybe you could say God spoke to me, but I felt very strongly drawn to then pursuing scholarship. And I hadn't before, to learn about the world around us, the material world, that I had an encounter with the spiritual. And I think it's dangerous, like you say. And if you don't have the wisdom and you're very young, you can really hurt yourself with that. because these entities, like this young lady that had this demon, it seduced her. She wanted the power. It was a trade-off. She wanted power. See, there's the wrong thing to want. She didn't want that serenity that comes from God. That thing separated her from God, separated her from herself. She was in a terrible place, but she couldn't get out. She didn't have a way out. Oh, you're muted.
So can we assume,
Mm-hmm.
based on this conversation, that perhaps, and I may be going out on a limb, but this is the whole purpose of this conversation, to go out on a limb, that the powers that be have this knowledge and are using the evil to their advantage. The materialism. They're using it as the Illuminati symbol. Hollywood.
Oh gosh, there's a book, a really frightening book. And I found there is some evidence that it's true. There was I wish I can remember his name. He was a Czech Christian mystic who had powers, he said, came from God. And to convince people against materialism, he would put on a magic show, do the levitating, do impossible things, read people's minds, whatever. And he would say, look, it's because I'm a Christian, and these are the gifts of the Spirit, right? He would take it out of the New Testament and say, look, I'm trying to show you this materialism is not right. And his father was a very spiritual guy in Czechia. Now, this was in the 1930s, when Hitler was coming to power. And he had this autobiography he wrote about how the Nazis tried to recruit him because they saw that he had this power. And they wanted to seduce him. And the scary part of this is I just finished Professor Spence's book on secret societies. Well, it's not a book, it's a series of lectures on Audible. And it mentioned this lodge in Munich. Now, he changed it to a different city. I think Leipzig, he had it in the book, but his secretary who published the book, I think after his death, said that he had disguised some of the names and stuff. There was a lodge in Munich that Hitler belonged to, supposedly, and a lot of the Thule Society guys, those mystics, and Himmler, and they tried to recruit him. But get this, it's like the lodge has 100 members, but the 100th member is this demon. It's like a Baphomet-like demon, right? And every year at the summer solstice, one member of the lodge gets sacrificed to it, and it devours them. They die.
That's insane. Right? Now,
and Spence has this. He says this lodge was real. The stories.
Well, a lot of creepy stuff has come out of Germany. Are you aware of the Vril Society?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. That comes from that British novelist who wrote. There was a dark and stormy night. What was his name? Yeah. There's the Third Reich. You know, we should talk about the Annenerbe and Himmler. They had, you know, Otto Rahn was looking for the Holy Grail, and he wrote a book about it. Of course, his homosexuality was discovered by Himmler, and he was made a concentration camp guard, and he took sleeping pills and walked into a snowbank and killed himself. But
now, a lot of people, Jeff, when I barely talk about these topics on my channel for like the last 6 years, there is literally a dozen people, and they must be in the know. And they're like saying, do not screw with this. Do not delve into this. Stop it. You're going to get bad results.
No, that's right. Because look, you got, you know, we don't know what was behind the Thule Society. We don't really know the hidden history of Hitler. A lot of that is obscured. Hitler was a person of misdirection. They had an expedition to Tibet. It's really weird. They had an expedition to Tibet. I think it was 1937, 38, and they found something. We don't know what it was they found, but they were giddy about it, and they thought it was a very important find. They went there looking for the long-lost homeland of the Aryans or something, but they interacted with Tibetan lamas. Now, there's a book. It's you know, a lot of apocryphal stories in it. You don't know if it's true. It's called Morning of the Magicians. Have you heard of this book?
Yeah, well, and a lot of my research has shown me that Jesus in his later years, from 30 on, was in Tibet with the monks.
Yeah, there's people who have made those claims. But anyway, what's interesting about this, they claim there's always been, there's the black dragons and there's the red, there's these secret societies in China in the East. But the one secret society that nobody can prove exists, it's a myth. It's like, oh no, that doesn't exist. It's called the Green Dragon, right? Have you heard of this?
No, I have not, but I know about the red and the blue dragon.
Right. There's these other dragons, but the Green Dragon is the most powerful and is the one that has the most satanic, shall we say, evil occult power behind it. And supposedly Hitler, there was the man with the green gloves was an Oriental, maybe Chinese or Tibetan, who would come to Berlin. And according, as I recall, the Morning of the Magician's Rite, Hitler had this ability to read something that was like tarot cards. He had a
Maybe
talent for it.
runes, but Oriental is a description of art. So say Asian.
Asian,
Yeah.
Eastern, Orient is East, Occident
When
is
you say
West.
Oriental, people get really offended.
Oh, do
It
they?
describes an art type and not really a culture.
Oh, I see. I didn't know
Yeah.
that because when
Yeah.
I grew up, Orient meant East.
Well, everything is so damn
Eastern.
politically correct. How would you know?
Right. I can't keep up with it, So anyway, he was, I don't know if he's Chinese or Tibetan. I think they thought he was Tibetan. And then there was a group of Tibetans who wore SS uniforms and that with the death head that were supposedly their bodies were found in Berlin in the rubble, right? This is in the Morning of the Magicians. So supposedly there's this tie-in, but there's a weird story out of the former Soviet Union. There was a Tibetan, one of these Tibetan monks was in a concentration camp in Siberia and he escaped. And this professor, I think it was Sverdlovsk, the university there. It's the biggest town in Siberia. I think it has a population of like 1 million people. And this professor took him in, and this monk knew ancient Sanskrit. And this monk knew about these lost manuscripts and about how the Tibetans had this magical power. And there was this group of Tibetans that were trying to control world history through magic, and that were involved on pulling the chain on the Germans and the Soviet Union. And there's Red Shambhala is a book too that you might look at, which is about the Soviet Union trying to go in and take over the Tibetan religion and influence it to become an instrument of communism. Very weird book. So
if it's true, what
Yeah.
were the Tibetans trying to influence? Did they actually create the World War II?
Well, one of my former Soviet friends, one of my Russian friends, really got into this. He translated some of it from Russian for me, and it's very bizarre stuff. Really bizarre about how the Soviets got involved with these, trying to get power out of these Tibetan magic men, and how the Tibetan magic men were maybe puppeting them. Who was puppeting who? Don't know. It's a really weird. Have you ever looked at Lenin's mausoleum?
No.
Did you know it's a pyramid?
But my father pissed on Hitler's gravesite. So there's that.
Hitler has oh, you mean in Berlin, where they've got the marker?
No, we were in Berchtesgaden, where he committed suicide. So his suicide spot.
Oh, he committed suicide in Berlin, supposedly, at the bunker outside the Reichschancellor.
I was only 16, but I remember we were in near Berchtesgaden, and there was a plaque in some facility,
right?
And I think they said that's where he shot himself.
No, that's where he had his vacation residence.
Yeah, because we went up to the Eagle's Nest.
Right.
This is somewhere down. Maybe we were in Berlin. How far is Berlin?
The Allies? Well, the Allies. It's in the mountains. His Berchtesgaden is in the mountains. Is in the mountains.
We were in Bavaria.
It looks over. I think you can see Salzburg, and you can see the mountains. And
dude, when you get up there, it's crazy. It's a spire. It's this.
Yeah.
It's thousands of feet straight up. The top of the mountain is flattened. There's a mansion up there, and it's just maybe 30 acres, and it's straight down a half a mile from there.
I think the Americans blew up the residence. I think they blew it up. And
But they restored it because when I was 16, I
oh,
was
did
there,
they?
like
They
the
restored.
position where
Wow.
Eva Braun was,
They
and we
restored
took
Ava
the
Brown.
elevator up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it was
Yeah.
crazy.
Wow. Yeah. No, he did not die there. He died in the Battle of Berlin, supposedly, if he didn't escape. He shot himself in the Fuhrer bunker,
Well,
which was
what do you
just off
think?
of
Do
the
you think
Reichskanzlei.
that Hitler's in Antarctica at the secret base in New Schwabenland?
I don't really, I couldn't find any evidence that Neuschwabenland is real. Maybe, maybe not. I've never been able to find it. But it's interesting. Some of the research done on Hitler, there's some witnesses, some curious stories. And what I can say is that when one of these, I forget, I think it was the BBC, it was one of these TV film crews went to Moscow after the fall of the Soviet Union because the Soviets claimed they had Hitler's, burnt remains, his skull, for example. So they went to Moscow to see Hitler's skull, and they were going to do a documentary about Hitler's remains. And they brought a forensic pathologist there who said, this is the skull of a woman. This isn't even the skull of a man, right? So it's like the Russians didn't have Hitler's remains like they claimed. It was just bogus. They were making it up. And there is, at the end of World War II, there's a very fascinating thing that I discovered. I got interested, Dinah West wrote a very interesting book called American Betrayal. It's kind of an alternate history of World War II from the point of view of the communists got into the Roosevelt administration, and Stalin was kind of puppeting the West and getting us to do everything. Every mistake he made, we were going around and we were helping him out. But what's really fascinating is I just was reviewing the Battle of the Bulge because military history is my thing, and I study battles and I try to learn. And as I was studying the order of battle, I had a documentary on my my iPad on the Battle of the Bulge, and suddenly it says on there that Hitler, in the middle of the battle, was told by his generals that they needed to pull back to the west wall because the panzers could get cut off by Patton. And Hitler said, don't worry, they won't surround me. And then they went over and said, it's very funny that uh, um, Patton was begging Eisenhower to flank them, that he could cut them off. And Eisenhower said, no, we're going to grind them from the front. And that got me thinking, because that was so absurd, right? Having just read Dinah West's book and seeing that. And her idea was that, there was something wrong with George Marshall. There was something wrong with Harry Hopkins. That our war policy was purposely misguided in certain ways. And I thought that's really misguided policy,
So
because you killed 80,000 Americans fighting
yeah,
the battle that way,
when
right?
you
I mean,
say certainly wrong, another bell rings in my head, and I went back to Hitler.
mhm.
And so what we know from Hitler and a lot of recent historical documentation is he literally had physicians on his team, and they were
Dr.
feeding him.
Morell,
Yeah, they were.
his one that gave him into the special gas pills that
So
made
he
him
was.
so
They were
gaseous.
feeding him a cocktail of methamphetamines and
Yep.
vitamin B12 and God knows what else. Could be psilocybin, but in my research and not so much research on my own history, it's these types of drugs that bring us to these states can be demonically possessed.
Now that's very interesting. There's another aspect to this you might want to know. Can you hear me okay? You were freezing for a second. Maybe I am. Did I lose you?
No, you were freezing up earlier, but you're excellent now.
Okay, good. Heinrich Himmler had a doctor named Kirsten. He was Finnish. He was a famous doctor masseuse. He used massage therapy, and he learned it from a Tibetan, by the way, or a Chinese trained in Tibet.
It's like everything is circular. Like the knowledge that we're gaining and what we're bringing
Right,
together is
right. So
really melting.
here's the fascinating story. This story fascinated me. Kirsten was treating Himmler because Himmler's guilt for the bad things he did manifested in tremendous abdominal cramps, massive pains. And Kirsten was the man with the magical fingers. He could make the pain go away. So he ended up becoming the confidant of Himmler. Himmler even confided in him when Hitler asked him to do the Holocaust. And Himmler was in a panic because you know what Himmler's first reaction to killing the Jews was? He told Hitler no. And Hitler was furious. And all Himmler could think was that he has to win the Fuhrer back by doing it, by doing the Holocaust. And there's Kirsten going, no, you don't want to do that. Don't do that. But where I get to Hitler's health, and this may be an answer to a lot of things. One day, and this is confirmed by SS General Walter Schellenberg, also was shown this file. Himmler had a safe behind his desk at Prince Wilhelmstrasse, the SS headquarters. And in that safe was Hitler's medical file from 1937. And there was like a 27-page report. And Himmler was so troubled one day, he opened that safe, he showed it to Kirsten. He said, "This is top secret. You can tell no one." And it was about how Hitler had contracted syphilis twice. And that in 1937, the disease was coming. He was headed for syphilitic paralysis. And by the way, those pills that Dr. Morell was giving Hitler were the kind of pills, they were like a chemotherapy for syphilis. Have you ever heard this before?
No, not at all. But I've had some really brutal STDs that came back.
Western, and see, the thing is he thought he was kind of, when he went blind.
So syphilis literally will make you go insane.
Yeah, it's syphilitic paralysis. And the thing is if you take like strychnine or poisons, they can set back the syphilis. They're going to poison you. But if it's in the tolerance level where you can tolerate it, it will hold the syphilis at bay. But it will delay it. And so notice Hitler starts pushing for World War II in 1938. Okay, so he gets this diagnosis in like October 1937, and he starts pushing on, he does the Anschluss, in March 1938. He invades Austria. He then demands Sudetenland and is ready to go to war. And then they, Chamberlain flies to Munich and they stop the war. And then he starts in on Poland, and it's like he believed he was going to die early because he had the syphilis and he needed to get things done. So he was in a hurry because he knew he had this disease.
So World War II was started because of a sexually transmitted disease from a leader that couldn't get laid.
Yeah, because, well, did you, and if you, I've spent a lot of time reading the people who were close to Hitler, what they said in their memoirs, like Christa Schroeder, his senior secretary, and Heinz Linge, his chief bodyguard and valet. And did you know they said that Hitler had a son?
Yeah.
In World War I, and they met him. And Himmler went to find him for him. So there's a lot of things, and they don't put any of these.
Is that Trudeau?
Trudeau.
That's Castro's son.
Castro's
Sorry.
son,
yeah. But let's get back to Hitler. When was he researching these megaliths and the ancient when was he taking these teams? I mean, he spent a huge portion of the funds he had to go to Antarctica and to Egypt. He was everywhere. He went to Malta. He went to Turkey. He was everywhere.
Well, let me explain. A lot of people don't know this about the SS, the Schutzstaffel, right? The Heinrich Himmler was ultimately the leader of the SS. The SS started out as a bunch of, they bodyguarded Hitler, but they were like educated people. They typically were people of high intellectual endowment they formed different research bureaus. They were researchers.
So, I mean, the SS is almost similar to the Masons.
Yes. Well, it's like the Knights Templars, right? They were like almost a holy order or an unholy order of, it was very, and Heinrich Himmler.
But all of these fraternal brotherhoods, are all the same. So they have ancient cultic like symbology and initiations, etc.
Yes, initiation. Yeah, initiative. And of course, look, they wanted to find Atlantis. They wanted to find the Holy Grail. They wanted to find the original homeland of the Aryans in the Tibetan highlands. They were gathering, they were researching, by the way, they were investigating all the other occult organizations on the planet. They wanted to know who all the magicians were, who all the occultists were, who all the secret organizations, all their front businesses. And in fact, perhaps the people who had at the time that the SS was forming, who had the most of this knowledge, this esoteric knowledge, were in Italy. And there was an esotericist, I think he counted himself a hermeticist. You may have heard of him. He styled himself Baron Julius Evola. Have you heard of him?
Yes, the Baron.
The Baron. And Evola he wrote occult books. In fact, Mussolini was even a little afraid of him because he counted him as having magical powers. Evola would do really crazy things, like when a bombing was going on, when the Allies were bombing things, he would go out and walk amongst the bombs to show his magical power to himself, that he was immune, right?
Well, yeah. Well, if you walk in a bomb field, and I know this from statistics because I looked at it, even if you were in the heat of battle, you had about a 90% chance of living. But 1 in 10, when a shell goes off, you're going to be obliterated. So,
well,
there's that. So he had a 90% chance of making it.
When he was in Vienna, and I think it was a Soviet bombing raid, he was crippled. He was a paraplegic.
Apparently that was his 10th run.
It basically got him. He did not, and he was in a hospital in Hungary at the end of the war. It's a very strange story. But what was Evola doing in Vienna is that he was helping Himmler and the SS with this gigantic archive of all the occult organizations in Europe. And guess who stole it at the end of the war? The Russian troops reached Vienna and they captured it. They got it. The Russians got it. Who's who of the world of the occult in Europe? The communist Soviet Union got it. And you will read, when you read the guy that did the biography on Alexander Dugin, the Russian so-called philosopher, and what is he? He's Putin's brain, they've called him. He started out, according to that biography, he was given the keys to this occult archive that the KGB had, and he was part of a sort of an occult circle in the Soviet Union that had access to it. And the stories about them are pretty trippy, but they were into Aleister Crowley. They were into Crowleyism, which is very strange.
Yeah, I mean, so what does that mean? What does that mean for us? And what is Putin working with? Is he using the same occult magic?
There are rumors that Putin is seeing shamans. I don't know if it's true. I've heard the rumor from Russian sources. Don't know if it's true. It's interesting, for sure. I knew a woman in Moscow years ago.
Now he's sick. I mean, I just heard that he may have cancer, and he's been doing some treatment.
I interviewed a friend of his, a private interview. I didn't publish it. More than a month ago. A guy that knows him really well, has known him for many years. They don't talk politics, they talk hockey, but this guy confirmed, he said, well, yeah, he has Parkinson's, and he has cancer of a gland. I forget. I wrote it down somewhere. I don't remember what he said, but he does have a form of cancer. But I said, well, is he dying? He says, no, it's treatable.
No, and both of those are very treatable based on my
research. They're treatable. He's not. He said he's not dying. That's not the case.
And by the way, let's get this out in the open. And I want to see if you agree with me. He's not an idiot. In fact, the fact that the United States and NATO is expanding, in my opinion, and adding maybe Scandinavian countries is the most dangerous and egregious thing we could be doing. And it's, in fact, posturing in a way on purpose to create a third world war. It doesn't have to happen this way, but it seems as if the powers at play are playing a very dangerous game. And that game is do things like if we add these countries in Scandinavia or even Poland, whoever we add, they owe so many tens of millions of dollars that they haven't paid in that it seems unfair to the rest of the NATO countries, first of all. Second of all, we're simply doing it to posture for another world war. I mean, there's no other purpose for it. Do you have any other explanation?
Oh yeah. Because this is my area of expertise.
Exactly why I asked you that.
No, that's I could refer you to some books. NATO never promised Russia that it wouldn't expand. The expansion occurred because the people in Eastern Europe feel so afraid of Russia coming back.
No, but my point is, you can't just say I'm not going to be a part of it for 20 years and then say I want to be a part of it, even though I didn't pay you all those millions of dollars. Let's start now.
You want to be a part of what?
You can't just say you want to be part of NATO now after you were decades ago and you haven't paid in. And that's the big problem. Most countries don't even pay in, and we're bankrupting our country to protect the world, and they haven't paid their fair share.
It's a very, I wouldn't, that wouldn't be the real issue. I suppose, look, you have to look at everything like strategy. What I could say is that the West has no strategy. That's why all of this is happening. The West doesn't want a world war. Nobody wants a world war.
Wait a minute. So we're just running blind, and we don't think Russia's going to nuke us or China.
We don't. Look, I have yet to find a Western politician who really knows what he's doing. This is what Western politicians do. We were talking about truth before, right? Let me give you a spiritual thing and see if you agree with this, because I do believe you have to integrate all your knowledge to understand. If I lie consciously and I don't really care about the truth, what does that do to my discernment of right and wrong and truth and falsehood? After time, what happens to my ability to perceive what's really going on? Does it attenuate? Do I become more brilliant? Do I become a Machiavellian mastermind, or do I become a kind of fool?
Well, when you say truth, what does that even mean?
Reality.
Okay.
Right? Reality.
So when they say Russia is bombing, when they say Russia is bombing Eastern Ukraine, and Eastern Ukraine is actually bombing Eastern Ukraine, Ukraine is bombing Ukraine, and they've been bombing Eastern Ukraine for maybe 24 years. I don't know how long it's been going on, but a long time. And then they're now blaming it on Russia. Like, what's the reality?
8 years. Okay, here's the reality. There's a brilliant book on this. If I could find it, it's called Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War. And the guy's name is Winitsky, Mikhailo Winitsky. And it's absolutely brilliant. And I've known a lot of Ukrainians. I've followed this and pretty closely.
Hey, I told you I'm Ukrainian.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
No kidding. It's not to bore everybody, but Ukrainian people decided, like the Americans did in 1776, that they didn't want to be under Moscow anymore. And they realized, their president, Yanukovych, was a stooge of Russia. And they wanted to get him to understand that they didn't want to be in the Moscow's customs union. They would rather maybe be with the EU, that they wanted more freedom, and that they didn't want to be beholden. They didn't want to be dictated to by Moscow. And Yanukovych reacted. They had a protest, and it was peaceful. And when the kids were packing up their things, the riot police, for no reason, just beat them bloody. And the Ukrainian people had a reaction to this. It's like, protest was over. The kids were peaceful. They were going home. Why did you beat up our kids? So the whole country went out into the streets, and they would go to the houses of the ministers and stuff and say, we demand that you respect us and respect our kids. And there was a journalist, she was lying dead in almost near death in the snow, being beaten almost to death by her car by the highway, and other people were being disappeared by the regime. And it just enraged the people more.
They were actually shooting civilians to enrage the people.
Well, I think Yanukovych doesn't deserve all the bad, because
but there's a lot of evidence that they were setting up people to be executed.
This is what they occupied Maidan Square, and they put up barriers, and the government and the riot troops tried to break it down, and they couldn't. And the more violence they applied, the more enraged the country became. And there started to be a death toll. And then these snipers appeared, and nobody knows where these snipers came from, except that there is some testimony, not proven, that they were from Russia.
Correct. And the snipers were killing
yes, they
people that were specifically would raise turmoil in the populace.
Well, here's what they did. They fired at the police to wound the police, like at the police's limbs, but they would fire to kill the protesters. Now, Nyquist's theory,
if that alone isn't purposeful incitement,
it is incitement.
And there's so many different ways to look at it, but it's truly what was going on.
Well, when Nyquist was there, and this is what he thinks. He thinks that that Putin was angry at Yanukovych because he basically told Yanukovych, "You crush those people. What does the matter with you? Why are you messing around? Run them over with tanks. And see, Yanukovych, to his credit, was not that bloody of a monster. He didn't want to kill his own people, but Putin was pushing him to do that. I mean, there's circumstantial evidence that was Putin pushing him, and he didn't want to do it. So Putin deployed. This is what a theory
but Putin at this time, wasn't he like part of the secret police, like the CIA?
No, he was the president of the Russian. This was in 2014.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So Putin is issuing these snipers.
Right. They came from Russia, and they positioned themselves on buildings. They wounded the police to enrage the police against the protesters, and they killed the protesters because Putin needed Yanukovych to win. And Yanukovych, to his credit, did not want to kill his own people. That is to his credit. But it happened anyway. He was brutal enough, he was corrupt enough, and he was enough of a stooge of Putin that he couldn't go all the way, to his credit, because he could have done a Tiananmen Square on those people, and he didn't. But the people were so enraged at him. And, you hear this over and over again. People, even Jordan Peterson said this in a thing. He said, Yanukovych was deposed. That's not true. Yanukovych was not deposed. Yanukovych, after the violence he did to the Ukrainian people, after the number of people that were killed unnecessarily and hurt, not the snipers, but the other stuff, he went to Kharkiv, Russians call it Kharkov, and he left the government. And a lot of the top leaders in the Ukrainian government, they just fled. Ministers, governors of territories, they fled, and most of them fled to Russia. And Yanukovych, his bodyguard said, "Look, the country's so enraged at you, we can't guarantee your safety if you go to this conference." He was expected to be at this conference, in which, they just wanted to talk to him. They wanted to straighten this out. And he got so scared, he just fled. He went down to Crimea, and he stepped onto the Russian military base down in Sevastopol. And that's what he did. He abdicated. He was not overthrown. He overthrew himself. He abdicated. We need to be precise. All this stuff is always being misrepresented. And he fled to Russia because he was scared. He was scared because he was guilty. He knew he had killed people. He'd enraged people. He did not handle it right because he had Putin telling him, "You got to hurt these people." And his instincts were, no, if he'd only followed his own instincts, it might have had a different outcome. Because as we see in Ukraine now with Putin's invasion, Putin's absolutely insanely brutal, right? I mean, the city of Mariupol completely turned into rubble. By the way, that is a Russian-speaking Ukrainian city.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people who say we think maybe 50 to 100,000 civilians died in that city, and they've taken 100,000, maybe more, Ukrainian civilians prisoner, and they've taken them to camps in Russia, and they've separated children from parents because they're going to raise those children to be, you know, Russian patriots, not Ukrainians. And I have friends in Eastern Europe. One of them is in Romania, and she helped to settle some. These are from Russian-speaking Eastern Ukrainians who fled the war. It was a grandfather, if I remember, a mother and two children. And she was in the car ride, she was singing the nursery rhymes to the children in Russian, but then they sang very emotionally the Ukrainian national anthem in Ukrainian. And my friend was just bowled over because she said they have, Putin has made Ukraine. He has united the Russian speaking and Ukrainian speaking Ukrainians. He's united them. And there's this Russian propaganda that has misrepresented. I got a kick out of this. You'll like this. I go on talk radio all the time, and I got a whole bunch of callers, and they were saying, "Oh, the evil Nazis of the Azov Battalion, and it's a Nazi regime, and those horrible Rothschilds, and the Jews, and that horrible Jewish, President Zelensky." And I stopped them and I said, "Wait a minute, this is a Jewish Nazi conspiracy? The regime is either Nazi or it's Jewish. It can't be both, right?" But it's because the Russians create narratives.
So what is the queer mongering dancing Zelensky all about? Like, why was he put there in power? I mean, because he has no obvious skills at being a leader of a country, but now in a war, he looks pretty capable. I mean, he just came from doing some queer ass videos that you can watch on the internet.
That was a long time ago. Remember, he was an entertainer and a comedian.
Well, still 20 years ago, I was in academia and I was learning the information that you and I are now discussing. And he was doing some queer videos. That's like kind of bizarre.
Yeah, that's a weird moment. Look, I don't know. He was in his 20s. That was 2 decades ago. I don't know what that was. But have you seen Servant of the People? The TV show that he did?
No, but I mean, has Zelensky served in the Ukrainian military? I mean, does he have positions of power? What is his background, and why is he in that position?
I don't know if he was ever in the military as a young person. He trained, I believe, as an engineer, and then he left that to go into comedy. He wanted to be an entertainer,
so he has he doesn't even have a 4-year undergraduate degree in engineering.
I think he does have an undergraduate degree. Okay. I think that's what he has. I think that's what his degree's in, if I remember right.
Good for him. But now he's been appointed by the U.S. government to run Ukraine.
No. He hasn't been appointed by the U.S. government. That's not true.
Well, that's the main narrative.
That's the pro-Russian narrative. Yeah. No, you have to be careful about these narratives. You should see Servant of the People. You should watch it. You should also read Winitsky's book and other things to get both sides. Ukraine was in the process of becoming its own country, of finding its own consciousness, like the 13 colonies. They decided they wanted to be independent of Moscow. That evolved in, like General Gage coming for the weapons in Massachusetts, right, to disarm the colonists, was like a catalyst event, like the events at Maidan Square in the Euro-Maidan revolution in 2014. They were catalysts. Now, let me tell you something. There were, how many statues at the fall of the Soviet Union, how many statues of Lenin do you think were in Ukraine in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell?
Maybe 50.
No, there were hundreds. There were several hundred statues of Lenin. When do you think those statues of Lenin were taken down?
I really don't have any knowledge.
2014, late 2013 and 2014 during the Euro-Maidan revolution.
So to give it an appearance of
By the way, they were never taken down before.
Yeah.
Right. See, let me let me go back and let me talk about Anatoly Golitsyn, a defector. Okay, he was a KGB officer who worked in a KGB think tank in the late 50s. He defected in 61. He became rather intimate with Bobby Kennedy, when Bobby Kennedy was basically running the CIA after they kicked out the CIA director that did the Bay of Pigs, Alan Dulles. But that's, and then there's a lot about the Kennedy assassination that goes back to there. And Golitsyn saw the beginnings of the reorganization of the KGB to carry out a long-range deception strategy. Alexander Shelepin had been made the head of the KGB then in 1958. And Shelepin gave a number of lectures that opened Golitsyn's eyes. One lecture was about fake splits. He looked at the genuine Tito-Stalin split in the late 40s when Tito and Stalin fell out. And they were shocked, the Soviets were, that the Americans rushed in and helped Tito. They helped one communist against another. And they thought, you know what, we ought to have a fake. Shelepin said, we should have a fake split with a communist country so the West will run in and build up a communist country. And someone raised their hand, Comrade General Shelepin, who should we have the fake split with? This was 1959. And Shelepin said, China. And that was among the things that Golitsyn came over to the West with. The other one was about a long-range strategy to basically liberalize the Soviet Union and get rid of its institutions and make it into a fake liberal, fake democratization. Golitsyn wrote a book in 1984 before even Gorbachev appeared. And in the book, there's a chapter at the end of the book called The Final Phase. He describes the whole methodology of the KGB. And he talks about what they do and how disinformation works and how active measures work. At the end of the book, he lays it out. He goes, the next Soviet leader is going to be a Soviet Dubček, right? Dubček was the liberal communism with the human face guy. And of course, he predicted that. And there's 140 falsifiable predictions in Golitsyn's book. And by 1994, almost 94% of those predictions had come true. He said the Berlin Wall would go down, the Warsaw Pact alliance would be wrapped up, that the Communist Party would give up officially power in the Soviet Union. It would seem to become a democracy. All the political prisoners in the Gulag would be amnestied, and people from outside would be drawn back in, from outside the country would be invited back in. But he said it would all be controlled liberalization. It would be fake. Now that's an extraordinary claim, except another defector named Jan Shena was shown part of the plan in 1967 before his defection, and it contained similar material about faking the collapse of the Warsaw Pact. And then there was Adislav Bittman, another Czech defector who also saw some of that same information. He looked directly for the head of disinformation, General Agents, at the KGB. So this in the defector literature astonished me. And I found this in the defector literature in 87. And I said, how can three different, wait a minute. Everybody Golitsyn came in for a hard time because people would say no other defector said this information, but he did. And that was when I had my epiphany. I said, oh my gosh, he's telling the truth. And my colleagues are just foolish enough to believe this when it happens. So I tracked it all. And I wrote The Origins of the Fourth World War because I started in 1987 because I had that epiphany. And I said, this is what they're going to do. China and Russia are faking their split. So we will build up China and be their partner. And Russia will fake its collapse. And they're both going to come back together and attack the West in a combination play, which I'm sorry to say is happening now. So if you think this is about Zelensky or Ukraine being bad or something, no, Golitsyn called it the long-range strategy. And because I wrote this book, I got My book came out the same year as a book of a defector named Colonel Stanislav Lunev. And a journalist put us together. Now, Lunev was a defector from the main intelligence directorate of the Russian General Staff, and he'd worked in China, and he spoke Mandarin. Brilliant guy. And I met him, and the first time I met him, we had a conversation for 4 hours. And I asked him about some very interesting things. It's so many details. But basically, I asked him about Golitsyn and about whether or not the collapse of the Soviet Union was a strategy. And at the end of the 4 hours, he said it was a plan. They did it. It was a strategy. And he admitted to me that he saw things when he worked in China that made him believe that Russia and China were secretly allied. And the linchpin is the key to the whole faking of the Sino-Soviet split is found in the conspiracy and death of Lin Biao, who was Mao's right-hand guy during the Cultural Revolution. Lin Biao was the head of the People's Liberation Army. Do you know anything about Lin Biao?
A little bit, but everything you're saying is confirming some conspiracy theories that I have.
Oh,
so,
interesting. Okay,
yeah.
You'll have to fill me in. So anyway, I had believed that the conspiracy and death of Lin Biao was the key to determining whether or not the Sino-Soviet split, as Golitsyn claimed, was a fake, because there were some suspicious things about it. There was a Chinese defector who claimed that Lin Biao was secretly working with the Russian General Staff to fake all the border fighting between the Soviet and Chinese forces to accelerate that border conflict so that Mao would be forced into his bunker, so that Lin Biao would then gas Mao in his bunker, and Lin Biao would take over and he would be Moscow's puppet or whatever. This was what this one defector who wrote the book, The Conspiracy and Death of Lin Biao. But I found it rather curious because, Golitsyn said that they would be fake the border incidents. They'd really be firing artillery at the troops, but it would all be for show for the West, because they wanted Kissinger to come and they wanted Nixon to come to China because of what General Shelepin said is if we have a split with China, the Americans will build up China, which we did. And it was right after the conspiracy and death of Lin Biao that Kissinger, it was just a matter of weeks later, Kissinger came to Beijing on his secret trip. And so I asked Colonel Lunev, I said, what do you know about the conspiracy and death of Lin Biao? Lin Biao, by the way, when he got caught supposedly in conspiring against Mao, he got in a jet with his co-conspirators and fled to the Soviet Union, was shot down by a Chinese interceptor over Mongolia and died. Okay. That's how Lin Biao supposedly died. And that's the official story that the Chinese have given out ever since. And now here's the interesting part. Lunev says to me, yeah, I know about it. I had a friend who was at the crash site of the plane in Mongolia, right? Okay, I'm all ears. He said everybody on the plane had been murdered before they were put on the plane, and the plane was crashed by the pilot, and we know that the pilot came back and was picked up on the Mongolian-Chinese border. So it was faked. The crash, the flight of Lin Biao to the Soviet Union.
So he ejected, and picked up, and it was fine. And
yeah, the pilot parachuted it out and crashed the plane in Mongolia, basically. There was no interception of the plane. So then I asked Lunev this one question. Since the Soviet officials were blamed for conspiring against Mao, and that conspiring with Lin Biao, and that Lin Biao was fleeing to their camp, that was the proof, he fled to the Soviet Union, proof that he was conspiring with Moscow. Since you had the plane, since the Soviet officials had control of the plane site in Mongolia being a Soviet puppet state, since you had control of that site and you know that it was faked, that Lin Biao never fled to the Soviet Union, he was just murdered and stuffed on the plane, why didn't the Soviet Union contradict the story that the Chinese put out? Why did they let the world believe the Chinese lie that Lin Biao had conspired with the Soviet Union against Mao? And Lunev, very surprisingly, said, well, I'd never thought about it. He'd never given it a thought. And then that was the part of the discussion that brought him around to Golitsyn, and he went and he read Golitsyn. And he said he had only one thing with Golitsyn that he disagreed with, but he said he's right about it. It had to be exactly as he said. It was and then you go back and you read Anna Politkovskaya making similar suggestions towards the end of her life, the famous Russian journalist. It's a very, I mean, the history of the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Union, is the history of the KGB controlling everything in that Yeltsin democracy. And I happened to meet another KGB guy. I don't want to get him in, if he's still alive, I don't want to get him into trouble because he's still over there. But he worked in Yeltsin's Kremlin, and he said the Yeltsin's Kremlin was a big KGB operation. They were all KGB guys. You know, they wanted to bring the system back to communism, but they found that they couldn't because the Russian people hated it so much.